Hello and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today on this semi-spring afternoon in Oxford. My name is Easton-Calabria and I'm a senior research officer at the Refugee Studies Center. And I'm convening this seminar series on localizing refugee research in practice. Today, I have the immense pleasure of introducing two former colleagues of mine, Dr. Kate Pincock, who's currently a researcher at the GAGE program at the Overseas Development Institute, and William Bakunzi, who's an independent researcher at the Nakivale refugee settlement in Uganda. William is joining us via WhatsApp voice note. So we have, after I'd say several months of trying to figure out a way to make internet from rural Uganda work with the UK, decided that this was the best format. So hopefully this provides a good model for localizing, presentations as well. And before I turn it over to William and Kate, I'll just draw your attention to the chat function, which is disabled, but the Q&A function, which you're welcome to type questions into at any point. I'll be collecting them. I learned from last week, 2 weeks ago, to ask you to be very succinct with questions as I am reading and listening, but I will try to pose as many questions as possible to Kate, and we have decided that any questions that are to William specifically, we'll ask him and we'll be able to upload something to YouTube along with this presentation of his responses via audio as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kate and William, and I'll be back to lead the Q&A in about half an hour. Talk to you all soon.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be with you today, and I thank Dr. Ivan and other organizers for giving me this opportunity to have a presentation with you. I'm called William Bakunzi, a Congolese refugee staying in Nakivale camp in Uganda since 2006. I've spent 15 years experiencing refugee life. All that time, I've been working as a peer researcher on various research projects with different organizations, including the Humanitarian Innovation Project and the Refugee Studies Center. I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Kate and Dr. Ivan for making possible through their advices and guidances my first publication of article with the Forced Migration Review. The title was Working with Peer Researchers in Refugee Communities. This was in issue number 59, page 58 and 59. Today, I have 3 topics to share with you based on my experience of peer researcher. Number 1, mismatching expectations about research between refugees and researchers. Here, I want to warn international researchers about some problem they may face if they don't take into consideration some points. Number 2, examples of some positive research practices as they were appreciated by peer researchers and other participants. Number 3, my thoughts about some useful or positive changes for refugees as a result of our research projects.
Great. Thank you very much, William, for the introduction. I don't really have much to add to that. Thank you so much for inviting me to present, Evan. We're really excited about the opportunity to talk about this. This presentation is drawn on the piece that William mentioned in Forced Migration Review, and another forthcoming article in Journal of Refugee Studies, which is about the same topic. And we wrote it after working together, and it's about some of the practical and ethical challenges in doing research with refugees, about refugees, and to benefit refugees, and how we can overcome them. So next slide, please. So there's been lots of attention to ethical research within refugee studies, and there's been a number of pieces, publications, special issues The one that most people are familiar with is the one by Jacobson and Landau in 2003. And there was a Journal of Refugee Studies special issue in 2007. The RSC's own Code of Ethics the same year was published. And then in 2018, this was all updated by the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration. And all of these provide a really strong mandate for researchers to work with refugees as peer researchers in contexts of forced migration. The Refugee Studies Centre themselves said it's really important to try and involve the people being studied in the planning and execution of research, and recognise that their obligations don't end when they leave the field. And this also kind of underlines the importance of using participatory approaches in research. And the way that we think about participatory research has sort of evolved over time, from initially being recognised as really quite instrumentally useful because refugees know other refugees, they know the context really well, and they can advise international researchers. But also now kind of it's more about recognising the agency of refugees as participants. And often this kind of draws on anthropological research. So we're seeing researchers, refugee researchers, not just as these conduits for international research, who aren't credited for their work and who are left behind in the field after research finishes to deal with the consequences, and seeing them as participants within these very exploitative research histories often when we look at the history of fieldwork with refugees. However, knowledge co-production with refugees generates various ethical considerations and challenges in and of itself. And I'm going to talk about some of those now before William talks about some of the benefits. Next slide, please. So there are a few key challenges to consider. First of all, I think it's really important to recognise this continuum of participation. Approaches to participation might vary. Genuinely participatory methods in which we understand research being driven by the community itself are very difficult to pursue. And in part, that's because research projects are often conceived within the Global North along the lines of interest within the Global North, right? Because that's how we secure funding. And so when they're driven by those agendas, it's very difficult to then kind of credit them as being really participatory if things are decided before you enter the field even. A lack of alternatives as well for employment and income generating activities can often mean that peer researchers can't really do very much if the conditions that they're working within with international researchers aren't very good. It's very hard to have equal partnerships when research is decided before researchers go to the field as well. And I want to underline that it's still worth doing participatory research despite these critiques, but I think it's really important to underline that the transformative objectives of the research itself have to be embedded within research practices and processes, and not just treated as kind of possible outcomes which refugees might benefit from and can help secure, but really think about how methodologically they can be ensured all the way through research. So in the next slide, we're going to hear from William about some of the ethical and practical benefits that are possible by working with refugees as peer researchers.
Topic number 1, mismatch in expectations about research between refugees and researchers. Here are some problems I think we should take into consideration as we work as researchers in refugee context. Problem number 1, relying only on official data delivered by UNHCR or governmental institutions. This may induce researchers in making some unexpected mistakes when doing mapping or data collection. This once happened to our team assigned to do interviews of 300 households of a specific category of population basing on figures from an official database. We were surprised to find on the ground only 50 households. This could have been avoided if I was given the opportunity to discuss about those figures we were given, because I knew the reality that prevailed in that entity. Problem number 2, using non-updated information. This can challenge the performance of data collection in some circumstances. For example, We were once assigned in 2018 to interact in terms of data collection with households sampled basing on satellite maps produced in 2015. It was so difficult for us to find some of those households because within 3 years, many changes have happened. Some households were no longer there, others, new ones constructed, new road made, a new structure built. This could have been avoided if we had used the update map or discussed about possible changes on the ground. Problem number 3, neglect to take into consideration the climate conditions. This can have a dramatic impact on research efficiency. We have witnessed several times situations where the well-going of data collection was challenged by too much rain, and moving around to find the target population was really chaotic. And this has been always affecting the timing of the activity, involving, of course, negative budget implications. Peer researchers always know the best time or the best hours of the day to go to field, and can help to avoid such kind of climate-related distractions. Problem number 4, neglect, ignorance, or lack of information related to local ethical values and attitude, or the current situation that prevails in the target entity of work. This can limit non-informed research in accessing the required information. For example, one time, our colleague failed to interact with people in a certain entity because simply of her way of dressing, a miniskirt. Some people, non-educated or Muslim, don't accept or tolerate some kind of dressing. Only the following day, she managed to interact successfully with them after my colleague and me have realized and advised her to change her dressing. Be also informed that the simple physical appearance or the attitude of researchers can contribute to disorient interviewees' expectations from the real goal or objective of the research. Some people think that white people are there to provide people with material support or giving them resettlement opportunities. Peer researchers, when given the opportunity, can help to prevent such kind of challenges by providing information on ethical values, attitude, and potential intentions of people. Problem number 5, lack of clarity in the way of formulating or asking questions and inadequate explanation of research objectives. This may confuse or negatively influence interviewees in terms of their attitude or expectations in such a way that some could become skeptical toward the real objective or the research, and others could become too much interested with the research with unreasonable expectations. Examples, there was a particular period it became clear that asking refugees questions related to returning to their country of origin was meaning having an intention of forcing them to repatriate. This was after some rumors had circulated on possible forced repatriation. There was also a time where we had a question asking a refugee to choose between a number of resettlement countries if he was given the opportunity of resettlement as a durable solution. That had the consequence of attracting more non-sampled refugees to ask for participation to interviews. Problem number 6, lack of feedback which is supposed to be given to research participants, including peer researchers. People need to be informed about how far the research which they were involved in has reached in terms of achieving its goals, changing opinions, policies, and programs, making better their lives. We have been witnessing situations where people refuse to willingly participate in a research interview, saying you are only there for playing with people's minds. You keep asking questions every year and you have never seen anything changing. From those examples I've just mentioned, I want to emphasize that to me, peer researchers are a vital contribution to success and effectiveness of any research project. They are indeed part of the target population. They are knowledgeable in terms of local language, ethical values, and attitude, prevailing situation, and they are most of the time experienced in terms of research practices. What they need is only being given time and consideration for a prior, honest, and transparent discussions regarding the preparation, implementation, and the conclusion of research. This could equip them with more information and knowledge to be prepared and able to manage respondents' expectations before and after the research. Topic number 1, mismatch in expectations about research.
Let me go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, William. Some really interesting insights there and reflections. And if you want to read more about that, then I really recommend his piece in Forced Migration Review. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the particular context in which William and I work together. And I think what becomes clear when William's reflecting on his experience in Nakivale is that this is a very over-researched context. It's been receiving increasing attention in recent years because of its kind of symbolism as part of the Uganda model of refugee management and self-reliance, and its potential for kind of informing the Global Compact on Refugees and sort of research management elsewhere. So there's a lot of research fatigue in this context. And so before we arrived in 2017, we decided to kind of draw on the network of refugees who had previously worked as enumerators and research assistants on other projects undertaken by the Refugee Studies Centre to find research assistants who could help us kind of navigate the settlement and access respondents. So we thought about it quite instrumentally, I guess. But then thinking more critically about the objectives of our research itself and what we wanted to do and really centering refugee agency, I think it became increasingly evident to us that there really was no alternative way of working. We needed to work in a way that kind of centered on refugees, like kind of their opinions about what was happening there, their capacity to inform the research itself, and not just kind of treat them as research conduits in that way. So although William and our other research assistants were fantastically well connected and knowledgeable, and William himself was an elected refugee leader for his district and had worked for several years in that capacity, our research model soon evolved from just being about kind of getting them to attend interviews with us and introduce us to people to actually then undertaking research independently themselves. And that was one of the most enriching parts of the process, I think, for all of us, was that they went away, did interviews independently. We kind of collectively analysed some of the data, and it was very iterative and helped to inform the next stages of the research process too, and sort of develop some indicative findings around what was going on with social protection in the context. So it went really, really well, and I'll kind of pass on to William about some of the things that about the project that he felt was successful. So next slide, please.
Topic number 2, examples of some positive research practices as appreciated by peer researchers and other participants. Example number 1, participatory methods such as focus group discussions and key informant interviews can contribute to fill gaps in recorded information, because most of the time they focus on the most knowledgeable people who have the opportunity to give out and discuss clearer answers. Example number 2, transparent prior discussion between peer researchers and international researchers which has marked them during the research project on refugee-led social protection. There was the opportunity to plan together and discuss the activity to do, and after it was done, what helped them to prevent possible challenges as mentioned in topic number 1. Example 3. The feedback was given to participants during a seminar held in Kampala. The refugee-led organization which could not attend the event were also given the opportunity to know and react on the findings and feedback of the research. We witnessed where participants were given the opportunity to react to recommendation as expressed by the concerned international researchers. Topic number 2.
Well, thank you for that. Previous slide, please. So as I mentioned, when I left the field, William carried on doing research independently, and we kind of carried on an email and WhatsApp correspondence as well. But there are some other things that I'm really proud that we did, because I think they really helped not only kind of continue that dialogue with participants, but also alleviated some of the pressure on our refugee peer researchers to kind of be the interface between participants and international projects. So we sent a monthly update email to everyone who participated, who shared their email addresses with us, so they could be informed about the progress of the work and what stage we were at, because I think there's a lot of opacity in the research process to outsiders, even within UK, let alone in Uganda, about how things actually operate and how slowly sometimes it can take for us to generate findings, publish, have things to share with them. So that enabled us to kind of have that open dialogue, and research participants could also email us directly then with queries and update questions. William's fantastic sole-authored piece and the piece that we've written together have been a really nice way of kind of channeling some of his own expertise and learning into the public field. And I think one of the challenges I've encountered has been the fact that a lot of this work has needed to take place kind of post-project, so post-field work, or after I finished working at the Refugee Studies Centre. And I think this is a kind of wider problem that we need to illuminate within academia, is that often research projects are fixed term in nature. They go on for a certain number of years or months, and then researchers are expected to move on to something else where they have a whole other set of participants they need to build relationships with and then maintain. And it is a lot of labour, and I think it's something that isn't really talked about or recognised at the moment. So one of the things that I would reflect on that I feel that perhaps we could have done better is to kind of maintain those relationships more into the long term, because that would be the ideal. But unfortunately, the kind of historical anthropological approaches where you just work in the same field for 50 years, it's no longer really the reality of the way that research is structured and funded. So next slide, please. So when thinking about how to design better participatory research, I think something that has really stood out to me is the importance of impact. So both kind of mitigating the negative impact for refugee researchers themselves, who are kind of often on the front line, and maybe therefore if refugees themselves who have been involved in research are frustrated or unhappy with the research findings or impact, then they're the ones that bear the brunt of that. But also ensuring that research has a positive impact and thinking about what that means. And I think one of the challenges at the moment with the kind of ethics guidelines that are available is that refugees, although we think about the impact on participants, we aren't really thinking about the impact on refugees as co-producers of knowledge and what happens to them within the field. We also need to ask questions about who it is that participates in research as refugee researchers, and also how they can mediate, whose voices we listen to. And I think that involves having a lot of very detailed conversations about kind of reflexivity and research practices. But it's also kind of made more difficult by the fact that we needed to be able to work with people who had a certain number of access to resources and knowledge, and that tends to be men of a certain position within refugee contexts. So that makes it more difficult to hear certain stories. But I think something that is really positive about the kind of democratization offered by the internet is that it does provide us with opportunities to overcome these spatial boundaries that happen when we leave the field and refugees are left behind. And although this has kind of, it can create more upkeep and more work for us, it should be kind of taken for granted that we should be doing that and then anticipated and planned for in our research designs. I think that's one way of kind of overcoming these challenges. They don't become this unexpected thing that we have to do later on, but are embedded within the research process itself. So next, we're going to just hear from William about some of the positive impacts that he's felt that we've had on the research, and also what support refugees might need to ensure those impacts are sustained and not at their personal cost.
Topic number 3, my thoughts of some useful or positive change for refugees as a result of our research projects. Here you can see 2 major examples. Example number 1, increase the number of microfinance institutions which deal with saving and loan as a result of recommendation expressed by researchers who worked on refugee economies and on refugee livelihoods. Indeed, among findings, it was clear that refugees have capacity and knowledge, but lack of startup capital to develop their income-generating activities, such as business or livelihoods. Example number 2, as a result of recommendation, based on research findings on refugee-led organization protection, we have witnessed the fact that refugee-led organizations are progressively being recognized by local authorities. The number of those organizations officially registered and working in refugee camp has increased considerably. The refugee-led organizations are enjoying the right of even competing on tender with other UNSA partners. For example, Wakati Foundation, a refugee-led organization, has already won out of many other NGOs competitors the contract of constructing 2 banks building in Nakivale and another one in Chaka. Refugee-led organizations are gaining more confidence to work for refugees and to be trusted by them, abandoning the traditional silence, neglect, and self-neglect attitude to a better innovative attitude. We are also currently witnessing the existence of a new, more powerful family of UNHCR, government, NGOs, donors, and RCUs, I mean refugee-led organizations, which is more active and cooperative than before. Refugee-led organizations were of recent able to attend without any interference of UNHCR or government the International Conference of Refugee-led Organizations in Ethiopia. The selfish attitude towards refugee-led organizations, which has been marking the NGOs, has transformed into a kind of transparent cooperative and partnership with the refugee-led organizations. Topic number 3, my thoughts of some. Let me now conclude saying that there is nowadays a fact which only blinded or non-informed researchers cannot recognize. The participatory research approach is key as long as research effectiveness and efficiency are a concern, and particularly when the field of work involves refugees as a target, which are also considered as subjects and objects at the same time of social protection. For that reason, the recognition of peer researchers' multi-important role should not be considered as a doubtful decision to be taken or as a last priority problem to tackle. They deserve much attention, starting from the research planning stage to its execution and conclusion. And the following questions should get proper answers. Question number 1, what do they need for the best work delivery? Full package of skills and knowledge? Better financial motivation? Question number 2, how can they be better equipped with everything they need to make them better, trustworthy, and representative towards local social protection actors and beneficiaries? Sufficient information, material, ethical skills and attitude? Question number 3, what can be done to avoid them remaining in a kind of dilemma or confusing situation of being forced to carry research-related questions and responsibilities after the real research institution has left the field? Regularly update them with research findings and feedback. Ladies and gentlemen, research can't stop. This precious tool, which always based on facts, to change or adjust opinions, policies, or programs aiming at solving problems, can't stop, of course. But let's admit that its methods should not remain static if necessary.
Thank you. Next slide. So I think much of what I've wanted to say, I or William have already highlighted. So these are just some points to summarize. But I think what's interesting in what William said in the slide before last is that we can see impact for research, but it just must not be at the cost of refugee researchers who are within the field when international researchers leave. And he's provided some really good ways in which we can kind of ensure that doesn't happen while still doing research that is of practical benefit to refugees. And I think a lot of that has to be done through a kind of restructuring of the way that academia is funded and planned for, but it can be done. It just means that we can't bring refugee researchers in as this kind of added extra without thinking more critically and broadly about the consequences and impacts for them personally, but also what that means for us as researchers in the longer term and those relationships and how we're going to sustain them. So last slide, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of my presentation. In case you have any question for me, I'm there for you. Don't hesitate to ask. Thank you so much for your attention.